So today on the show, I'm very excited to welcome Spencer Gallagher. So Spencer is a seasoned expert in agency growth and M&A with over 30 years of experience in the design, digital creative, and advertising sectors. He began his career by founding Blue Halo, a digital agency he started from a shed in his late mother's back garden. I want to dig into that. Probably starting an agency in a shed is more difficult than other places you could start an agency. So beyond that, Spencer is the co-author of Agencynomics, an Amazon 5-star rated best-selling book aimed at assisting agencies in scaling from startup to significant revenue milestones. He is very involved in agency M&A, which I'm sure we'll get into, and he is across the pond where it's a bit later. So Spencer, thank you for being on the show.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak to you.
Yeah, there's so many places to go with this. I guess my first question is, we're recording this like January 16th, 2025. What are you seeing right now in the agency space? How would you describe it?
Well, I can certainly speak from a European perspective. I do work with a lot of US agencies as well, and I can't really necessarily predict the same amount of sort of figures, but generally speaking, most people I've spoken to in the States have sort of half told me similar patterns. But I'm seeing the last 24 months, there's clearly been a lot of macro challenges in the marketplace. You've had, a couple of wars on. We've had major change happening in the political infrastructures around the world. But Europe, especially, I think, has suffered from hyperinflation, and people have lacked a bit of confidence. So definitely the last 24 months have not been, let's say, the most buoyant when it comes. It's almost like there was a post-COVID bounce, and then there's been this sort of slump now. And yes, the market never just goes up in a straight line, but I'm certainly thinking that the worst is behind us now, and that hopefully the road forward is hopefully with the change in the political system in America, maybe it's a little bit more commercially focused now. It might end up actually hopefully having a knock-on effect to the rest of the world as well.
Yeah, it's funny because like we do a lot of coaching and consulting for agency new business, for helping agencies build outbound systems and that kind of thing. And we'll hear sometimes excuses like, well, we don't want to do this now because of politics or because of the economy or because of interest rates, and we're just going to sit on our hands or do.
And not objections, are they?
Right. So, but at the same time, like if you were the CEO of Walmart, probably, the interest rates are going to affect your life in a big way. So I love your thoughts on that. And you have a great perspective from being an M&A. Like, what is that through line from the macro to the micro when it comes to agencies? Like, how are those things connected, and what do you do with these things you can't control?
Well, the thing about agencies is, being that we're professional service firms, is that we do rely on a market being confident. If the market isn't bullish and confident, people don't like to invest and spend money, And, of course, on one hand, every company has a budget line and has money that they've allocated to spend on marketing. But if the companies aren't performing as high as they are, the first thing that will be adjusted and cut down relevant is the marketing budget, And as much as we all know that the companies that do better in downturns and recessions are those who invest in marketing, because they always come out much stronger, the reality is the CFO is looking at the top line growth, and whatever their budget is for marketing, 5 to 25%, they're going to be, squeezing that a little bit, because they don't want to end up having cash flow problems. So, of course, there are always fast growth sectors. And I think in downturns or when the economy is the landscape's a little more fragile, I think it's always worth trying to focus on the fast growth areas where maybe there isn't this confidence problem. I think it's quite hard if you're a niche focused agency, because it may be hard for you to break out of that niche, but there's still maybe somewhere a periphery around your niche which is fast growing. So I think it's something that everyone should really consider. But yeah, look, we're businesses built on confidence. When the market is confident, then you'll start to see people not ghosting you, coming back, having conversations, and not because really there's those reasons you gave me. They're not really objections, are they? They're more just kind of like they're just trying to avoid any conversation because don't want to end up having to commit to anything, I think.
Could be. Yeah, for that definitely happens. I think I want to circle back to that and to niching and specialization and all that good stuff. First, to get into your story, can you talk a little bit about your journey founding Blue Halo and how you did it from a shed?
Well, do you know what? It's a really good backstory, and I think hopefully it's inspirational for anyone else out there who ends up being like me. It's their starting life. You know, my parents got divorced at a young age, and I had quite a poor upbringing. I lived in a sort of small 2-bedroom apartment. My sister had a room. I had a room. My mum slept on the sofa bed in the lounge, and I left school at 15. I had no qualifications. You know, I left home at 16, and I lived in a bedsit with 2 other girls, and I got a job selling clothes in a retail store called Top Man, which I think actually did go to the States eventually. And I really had nothing. And through that, I, had to build my career. But it was very weird because I had always had this fascination with computers. And so in my spare time in retail, on my weekends, I learned to build computers. And then in 1990, 89, 90, I started to learn around that time the internet was starting to come out about 92, 93. I started to learn HTML. And I ended up basically in my spare time learning to build websites. So by the time I got to around 1999, my career had actually taken off by then. I'd gone from sort of strength to strength. But then we had a bit of a downturn in the UK in 1998, and I got made redundant. Actually, I left the job because it was a sales job, and I performed so well. My ego got the better of me. I thought I was really good. I took another sales job, and of course, after 6 months, I hadn't hit my numbers, and they just let me go. And if they'd given me like 12 months, it all came in. When I left, all the revenue came in. But so I lost 2 jobs in a year, and I just thought, what am I going to? I can't rely on other people controlling my destiny anymore. So I got given $5,000 redundancy from my last job. I worked out I could survive for 3 months off $5,000, $1,500 a month. My now wife was my girlfriend, so she let me sort of say rent-free in her house. And I walked to my mum's house, which had no company car, lost my company vehicle. So I walked to my mum's house, and she had a purple shed in her back garden. And I literally put my computer in there, had a small little wood burner, and it had power, so I could plug in the laptop or my computer. And I started to build websites in 1999. And then in the year 2000, you might remember the dot-com crash happened. And in the year 2000, people, would say, what do you do for a living? You didn't say you built websites because everyone would laugh at you. In fact, I tell this story quite a lot, by the way. It's a good reminder to today is that in the year 2000, I actually got married. So this year, 25 years ago, it's obviously good for working out anniversaries when you get married in the year 2000. But my father-in-law, I got married in Scotland, and my father-in-law at the wedding said, so my son-in-law Spencer works in the internet business, and the whole congregation laughed out loud. Everyone, it was a bit like if you stood upstairs and, hey, I work in crypto, or I work in Web3, everyone would laugh, right? So it's quite amazing when you look back over 25 years, how the internet has cemented into everyday life from a joke. But obviously, I was very blessed. I started the business, and I could have gone out of business 8 times. It wasn't easy, but through that, we became the 8th largest, digital agency. And I built the NFL for Europe. I worked with Andy Murray. I built some of the biggest soccer clubs in the world's websites. So in the end, it was a good journey, but fraught with challenges.
Yeah, thank you for sharing it. I guess my question is, do you think that there's anything like that now, where if you said that your son was in that industry, he would be laughed at, that might have that potential?
Well, I think a lot of people, weirdly, 12 months ago, I was still seeing very cynical people talking about Gen AI. There were still people in companies going, I'm not using this. It's not very good. They'd use it once, had a bad experience, and then just kind of wrote it off. So I think there's continually things that we label as fads that maybe don't come through and mature. And, like always, there's a hype cycle, and obviously some things take longer to mature than others. We've been waiting ages for mixed reality, virtual reality, augmented reality to really cement much more. But I think, we're getting closer with Meta now. I think that Web3 kind of had its moment, and then it kind of sort of disappeared. And all of a sudden you can see now the crypto prices are going back up. They're becoming more stable assets now. Major people are investing in them. So I think, when the internet started, we didn't have the internet. You'd go to the library and buy books on how to code. But now with what we have with AI, of course, we've got the internet. We can ask AI to solve all the problems for us. So I don't think it'll be 25 years to maturity. We all know that basically, AGI should be with us within the next 2 to 3 years. And so I think the exponential growth of technology is going to, it's going to rapidly change things as long as consumer adoption and business adoption can afford to keep up with it. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I want to go back to Blue Halo a little bit.
Yeah.
So you're building websites, it's working out, you're kind of through the bubble popping. What came next, and what did you learn from building the agency up?
So I think that there's a few key things on that journey. First of all, I started building small websites for low cost pricing because I thought that would be my niche, And then I think I was about 6 years into the business when I realized that it all came down to my activity. So the more activity that I did, the more revenue the company had in. And the importance of building the team around me to free me up, to become that thought leader, to become that industry expert. I had this kind of sort of very weird, so I'm a big, I came from a sales background. So a numbers game for me is very important. But I worked out if I met 50 new people personally in the spaces that I operated in every month, I always would win $300,000 worth of business. Well, I'd have $300,000 in my pipeline. I'd win $100,000 a month of new business. So I was very fascinated and curious about how new business came in. So that was one of my first things. So when I met 50, so when I was busy helping the team deliver, obviously I wasn't winning any work, and I had to learn that my activity levels had to maintain through every month of the year. And I've still to that day, when I advise agencies, if an agency owner, has children, or they get injured, or they get ill or sick, or there's distractions that are happening to them, the business pipeline always suffers, shortly after that, whether or not that's from lead generation or just helping towards the pitch or helping towards building the relationship with the prospect. So there were some key things there. I think, obviously the thing I would say, and I do have a story somewhere I share called The Agency Struggle is Real, which just basically says at the end of the day, you've got to have a clear vision. You've got to know why you're doing what you're doing. I know it's really obvious things to say, but if you wake up every day, you know why you're doing what you're doing, then it's a lot easier when you have the tough times, because running an agency at times can seem probably, I said this the other day, I was trying to quote a TV show. It was based on something, running an agency is a bit like running a business, which is a continual series of disasters followed by the odd moment of success. Maybe that's like sales, It's like you can make 100 dials and eventually you get 3 people come back to you and say they want a meeting or whatever, So key things with the biggest thing for me was the secret of new business. When I eventually sold the company, the new owners said to me they would share the secret of agency new business, and that was a real eye opener for me.
What's the secret?
Well, so I said that to him, what's the secret? And he started to talk about his positioning and his value proposition, and he talked about, his sales process to me. And I'm like, no. Like, we all know what sales process is, and we all know we need to get our value proposition right. But I was like, where did your leads come from? That's what I want to know. Because, for me, I was getting most of my leads through speaking events in my industry, going to sports events and speaking there in front of TMOs and marketing managers. I was getting it from the content for leadership I was putting out. I was getting it from my network and my client referrals, classic ways. But it was fascinating. So I said to him, who's your biggest client? So the guy that bought me his biggest client was, I think back now, it was I think it was Nokia at the time, and I think they were spending about $10 million. I think, in fact, it's probably more than this, by the way. I think it was, go get the ratios right, because it was $2 to the pound. It's probably at the time, probably about $16 million. And I said, how did you win the account? And he said, well, the client's my next door neighbor. And then I said, well, who's your second biggest client? And he said, Sony. And I said, well, what do you do for Sony? So I work with the TVs, the Bravia TV, B2B. I went, oh, I said, so how did you win that client? He goes, well, he's in my triathlon club. He's my best mate there. I said, well, who's the third largest client? He goes, Virgin Atlantic. And I said, well, how did you win that business? And he said, well, my head of new business was really good friends with someone in the marketing team, and they got me opportunities. And he went through everybody. Now, here's the thing, though. He said to me, Spencer, I didn't win the business because of that. I won the business because we had to go in and we had to pitch and demonstrate. But I got the opportunity because of it. And then as he went through the list, there were more. There was a very solid outbound strategy. There was a very solid strategy for clients, a very solid strategy around strategic alliances and partnerships. So there was a very holistic plan actually for the marketing, which fed into all of those areas. But it was a realization for me that the marketing that leads to good pipelines comes from multiple sources, not just one. Every area, the work you do is very important, but it's a very important part of a mix, yeah? And it's that mix that's key. And I think that I went away, I studied $1 billion worth of pipelines after that. I went to all my friends, all my big agencies, and I said, how did you win your biggest client? And I started tracking all the data. And it was a real eye-opener because what I realized was that sales isn't a one-trick pony. Marketing in an agency is not just one thing, It's a multi-pronged attack, and you have to make sure that you have the right mix of all of the areas to ensure success. So that was probably ultimately in the end, because the thing is, no leads, no sales, no revenue, no people, nothing to deliver, no profit, no agency, right? So everything starts with a lead.
Yeah, I love what you're saying because it gels with our approach, which is looking for basically finding these tribes, these people. Because what we found is that agencies and others will assume that if only people knew more about us and if only we could go over all of our benefits and differentiators and everything, then they'll hire us. But that's not really what's closing these deals or even getting people into the rooms. It's this trust factor. It's this, I don't quite know how websites or programmatic works, but this person's in our world. And that informs a lot of how we do outreach, which is looking for commonalities. I'll give you an example. We have per the UK connection, we have a client that was selling into B2B tech companies, and we found everyone who he was going after. We Venn diagrammed UK expats by looking at their colleges and things like that. And he opened up every email with, "I'm a big Tottenham Hotspur fan. They're doing horribly, as they always do." And that got all the doors open.
I know them.
Was that?
I built their website, so I know them.
There you go. Yeah. And then you got all these meetings from it. So it's often, I think that in B2B, we like to pretend like we're more rational and that we're, more on the ball.
Well, there was a Harvard study, wasn't there? And it said, and I think I'm going to take this from Robert Cialdini's influence book, where if you meet someone and you find one thing in common with them, you've got a 95% chance of a successful outcome on negotiation. So it's the same thing, like finding that point of commonality is so important because it's almost like an innate trust that happens, you support the team I support. There's trust built. It's not like we've known each other all our lives, but there's just a connection that's performed there. And the more of those you find and the more you spend time with people, the more that grows. And by the way, I genuinely think that the world changed last year. I really do fundamentally think from an agency perspective. And I think generally that client relationships and prospective relationships have got to shift and be much more experiential. And they have to be, the client and prospect relationship is the new gold in agencies. In the past, people talked about, culture trumps strategy, Peter Drucker's famous saying. But I think now client and prospect relationships are the most important thing, because actually, when it comes down to it, it's the human experience that will trump all of the other automation that will take place, around product and service delivery.
Yeah, that we always value that which is scarce, and that is going to become more and more scarce. So I think that's great. I want to move on to Cactus and everything you're doing there in a second. But before we do that, because I have our audience living in my head. So you have this sales background, and there's probably people listening that are like, okay, I don't have that sales background. I'm an accidental business owner. I was really good at websites. Like, what do I do? How do I make this lead gen system work?
Yeah.
I'd love to hear.
So first of all, I want to make this really clear. When I went through 3 jobs in a year, my confidence was destroyed. When I started that company, I told everyone I was a web designer. And I wasn't a salesman. I'd lost it. I was building websites, designing and building websites, and that's what I did. And I was not a salesman probably in that business for at least, it took me, I think, 3 years to recover. I'd lost all confidence. I just didn't think I could sell anymore. But yes, look, ultimately I had more of a sales background. And I think when I've done surveys, 50% of agency founders tend to be from an entrepreneur background, and the other 50% tend to be creative strategists or technical people. I think the difference, I have a business partner, by the way, who's the complete opposite of me in Cactus. And so he is, he's introverted. He's an accountant by trait. So he is that person. And what I've noticed with him is his sales techniques are actually better than mine, probably because he builds deeper, meaningful connections. So for me, look, I'm, expressive. I can be best friends with someone today in 5 minutes, but it's not really in depth, whereas he will build. So what I would say to those people is send a message to people. There was a really good book from a lady in New York who wrote it. I can't remember the name of it. And she talked about how she'd moved to New York and she just wrote letters to people saying, I would just love to have 30 minutes on Zoom with you, and built her network. But she built really deep, meaningful connections with people. So what I would say is that when you do reach out, you're more likely to probably get people to connect to you. And you probably won't do it in such a extrovert way. You may not go out networking at big events. You might do. I mean, I think in the States, I don't think anyone really has that problem today. I think UK, we're much more reserved. I don't think we're as the introverts are as outgoing as maybe they are in America, but from what I've seen. But so I think, look, I do think that there's different approaches. I think that you might write more content. I certainly find the agency owners that come from creative technical will write more. They will, they'll certainly try and leverage content more. They're better communicators in a way, so they can write, could do things where they'll put the time and effort into it. So, but ultimately, I still would say, regardless, having a marketing manager in your agency, we have something called the 42-point plan we give to our clients. It's 42 different pieces of marketing that they have to tick off. And what you guys do is on that list as well. It's like everyone I'm getting a marketing manager to do that, to bring the leads in. And then that obviously helps with maybe cutting down so much on the going out, having to speak but if you can't speak on stage, you could probably be on a panel maybe, or be on a podcast, and maybe that'll make you more comfortable. But what built my confidence weirdly, and I would advise this to everyone, is I started talking to my team when I had one person, then two, then 3, then 4. And that actually rebuilt my confidence talking to other people. And I think, start with your own team, and don't be afraid to go on Meetup or somewhere does that still exist, and find small groups locally, or even build, small groups in your agency to practice these things with each other.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so let's talk about Cactus. How did you transition to that, or what inspired you to go there?
I sold the agency. I'm a great believer, even on what we do at Cactus now, you sell on culture fit, because if you get the right culture. So my career was hitting a ceiling. The people in my agency needed to be promoted. I was growing fast, but I wasn't growing fast enough. And big agency came in and said, look, we want you to be global head of digital, which for me was a brilliant career move. We'll buy your business off you, which gave me some money to de-risk. And it gave my team international career paths, and they've all gone on to do hugely successful things as a result. But after a year, I think it was, they fired the guy I sold to, the company behind the company that bought me. And so I ended up working for someone who wasn't the person who was the culture fit. And so the culture changed quickly. So it was fine. Look, I was only 37 when I sold, and I'd kind of made enough money. I was lucky, someone who had no money went, literally, I think my first take home pay was $100. I was like $100 a week I was earning on my first job, So I've managed to make, a nice amount of money. And then I took some time out to recharge, because agency life is exhausting. I just won £1 million pitch, and I think I'd worked something like 63 hours with 3 hours sleep, and I was burnt out. I'd left my wife on the doorstep with the removal people while I was got called to the client in Paris. So she's like hating me because she's trying to move into a house. I'm not even around to be seen. And so I took some time out, and then the phone rang, and what it was other competitors of mine rang up, and they said, this is 2011. And they said, look, Spencer, you've done this journey with a digital agency. All of the people like you with grey hair, my hair's got greyer since then, they're all madmen. They all come from the advertising and marketing world. They don't understand technology like you do. And we are more digital-centric. So it started off, Cactus, helping digital-centric agencies. In fact, the best story of all is that the first client rang me up and he said, can you help me? And I was like, no, I don't want to go back into agencies. He said, what? He said, please, 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 I'm desperate. I've got a team of 20 people. They're working till midnight. We're making no profit. So I went down. I told him 3 things. He did those 3 things, then rang up about a quarter later and said, they worked. You've got to do this for a living. So I rang up my old CFO and I said, look, Pete, if I think there's an opportunity to build a consulting practice where we're different. We go in as pairs at Cactus. So we have a CFO and like me acting as almost chairman. And then we go in together and we then take agencies typically from $1 million revenue to 1 to 3 million EBITDA as a consulting practice. And that's kind of where it started. It pivoted we've always done M&A, but actually as the business has got bigger and bigger, we've now doing more and more M&A. So today we're half M&A and then we're half consulting.
Makes sense. And that's a crazy journey to get there. I appreciate you opening up about it. One question there is, before we put on the recorder, you're hinting at something that 90% of the agencies they're able to, I think you said, either sell or be successful with M&A or doing. Can you talk about that?
Well, it's only 0.3% of agencies that go on to have a successful exit. It's quite a low number. And as you know, probably that I think I did a post this morning. I think in the US, there's a great book on this, but I think called Buy and Build or something. And in there, he said 6% of US agencies reach $1 million. In the UK, it's 4% of businesses reach £1 million. So it's not very many agencies hit the first million. And the first million is where you really have the foundation to scale up. So, yeah, I've got 6 friends, and between us, we've had 5 agencies, and every one of them built them and sold the agency successfully. And when we all come together, it's very clear that there's a commonality. We're not all salespeople, by the way. You know, one of them is a technical person. One of them is very much a client service person. All had different backgrounds. One other's like me. There's another one entrepreneur who's, I jokingly call him the lazy entrepreneur because he doesn't seem to do any work at all and he grew his age. But there is a commonality between all of us around understanding that our business is an asset and continually understanding how to build value in the business rather than treating it maybe as a lifestyle where it's paying the salaries. It's kind of, it was almost like just making sure that, like when you own a home, you decorate it, don't you, to make sure you keep the value. You wouldn't let it go into disrepair. I think it's like those agencies that, I would say 90% of the agencies go on and have big success. They're just much more aware of how to build asset value, and they understand that the asset has a life cycle. Like they know that basically that business at some point could go out of business if it doesn't reinvent itself. If RGA is one of the most famous agencies. You're in New York. Do you know RGA? Yeah. So RGA reinvent their business every 9 years. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that kind of is quite a lot of pressure for agencies to have to think about the fact that their business is always going to be commoditized over a 9-year life cycle, the services that they do, So having to reinvent I've seen many agencies grow to big size and then go completely out of business. So I think understanding, there's a few sort of commonalities with the people that I work with that are successful or have successful outcomes versus because if you look at the stats, I've just done an M&A survey in the UK, and 74% of agencies reported one day they would like to sell their business, but only 0.3 will go on to do it. So that's a big gap, a big difference. So I don't know if that answers your question.
It's really interesting because, we've heard a lot about treating your business as an asset, but I think you added an interesting angle, which is that assets depreciate or they degrade if you don't change
exactly
them.
Yeah.
So I want to bring that
people get set in their ways, don't they? And you know what the other thing is, having external advisors calling you out on that, because when it's your business, you don't know, you're blinkered, you're just running the business. But having someone come in who's not a yes man, someone's going to come in and tell you and say, for me, I tell my clients, now, next, future. Now, next, future. I want at least 10% of your billings on the next and future services at any one point. You know, if you're not using Apple Vision Pro, you're not selling, LLM creation, building, solving their data problems. I'm going to pick, I don't know, you're not focusing on TikTok shop advertising. Like, you're not looking at the future trends of revenue. Like Gary Vaynerchuk did this very, very well. Like he always looked on the next and future, and I'm sure 90% of his billings were quite boring and quite, normal media billings, but that next and future is key.
Yeah, I'd love to dig into that more in the context of what you're seeing in the acquisition space. Like the agencies that are going to be part of that 0.3%, hopefully it gets higher. Like what are they doing?
So it's a great question. I mean, that's the thing. The most important thing in my day job now is knowing what buyers want. And there's a few things I'll throw off. I think agencies working in data, because you can't put AI tools into a business if the data's not structured correctly. Yeah, too many businesses don't have their IP, for example, don't have their intellectual property, their knowledge put into any kind of database. There's a lot of stuff that's just written down, but it's not actually in a database. Even things like your podcast interviews, all these things are basically content that should be within a database on an LLM because it's all interesting information. So data, number one. I think, data and insights when it comes to running marketing campaigns, integrating into technology tools, that is vitally important. I think more so paid performance on kind of Google was actually still very popular because of the reoccurring revenue model. Actually, it's been still quite desirable because a lot of agencies that are project-based suffer from lumpy sales cycles. But obviously, everyone wants paid social. And, paid social is definitely top of people's lists. If people have got influencer marketing services, paid social, that's certainly one of the top requirements at the moment. The next one is what trumps AI? Well, brand experience and brand activation. Yeah. So in a post-AI world, the human-to-human experience becomes more valuable. So people who market human-to-human is actually trumping potentially some of the AI, people see it. So brand experience, brand activation certainly had, in my eyes, the last 8 to 10 months of real rebirth in demand, whereas brands have been reasonably flat for a few years. Digital PR, so obviously organic SEO, understanding, AI search and everything around there, but understanding really how to help clients build better source areas for their content, seeding their stories and data into press, so it's going to feed these into these tools. Digital PR. I think TikTok shop is another area. I think TikTok commerce is big at the moment, and that's certainly growing. What's happening in the States? Are you guys banned it or not? What's happening?
It's a good question. I mean, I don't have the exact perspective you do from not doing from acquisitions and so on, but I think everything you're mentioning is true. I think that our window is very much into what you would describe as brand experience and human to human. That's what we're seeing work in the context of sales outreach and that kind of thing. Because
so you can see why the agencies would be important.
Exactly. So on the consumer side, which our clients deal with, it's really about pattern interrupts, I think. It's about, it's not the thing that AI is doing right now, which is
behavioral marketing as well. I would put that in there with the pattern interrupt side of things.
Yes, so that's super interesting. And then on the other hand, I always love to ask this. So those agencies that are listening that want to become part of this 0.3% in the next few years, what should they stop doing?
Stop having your eggs in one basket with one bloody client. The amount of agencies I turn up and they've got one. The easiest way to devalue your business is to have one client more than 20% of the revenue. Don't be complacent. I've been into so many agencies over the years where they say, oh yeah, but we work with 14 different products within that. So the first thing is I would say that. The second thing is, previously I would say you've got to build a good team, because a lot of businesses are too profitable. They don't have enough team members and their valuations become too high. But strangely, with the transition to AI, I actually think smaller teams working with technology, creating much bigger revenue numbers and more output is actually going to be the roadmap for the next few years. So what should they stop doing? What should they stop doing? Yeah, stop having one. That's definitely one. I think stop working in the business for sure, right? You know, you've got to have a leadership team in place. You've got to be in control of vision, culture, you know, overseeing vision, overseeing culture, you know, actually, yes, overseeing sales. Was it Harvard Business Review had said where CEOs are involved with sales, they typically grow, I think it was like 3 times faster. So there's still a touch point there. I'm not saying you're in every pitch, but you're certainly showing the customer that they're going to be important to you if they work with you, and certainly spending time going to see customers without getting dragged into the running of those accounts, I think will become, again, even more important. What else would I stop doing? Stop hiding behind your computer, maybe, would be another one. Because actually, when you're buying a business, like when they're buying your company, they want to see about you. How are you going to add value to that organization? Right. You know, what are you going to do? And how good is your network? I remember when I went through the process to sell my business, you know, they checked out who I had in common on LinkedIn, and then they sort of went out and spoke to the people in common. But because I had at the time a good amount of connections, it seems like everyone's overtaken me now because they've all got automated tools to add hundreds. You know, I tend to only connect to people I've ever met or spoken to. So I think certainly, you know, stop hiding and try to develop your personal brand in the way that you do. I'm not saying everyone has to be a Stephen Bartlett or a Gary Vaynerchuk. It's just not the case. There are plenty of nice, lovely, inwards, you know, slightly inwards, introverted people with personal brands, right? Try and find someone like that you can emulate.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And one thing you hit on is the headcount thing. And I've noticed that in entrepreneurship, we're always like looking for this platonic ideal of what to do, but there's certain things that just become popular and are popular just for no particular reason, just based on trends, just like clothes or anything else. And I think one of those is headcount, because if you go back a few years, it was really cool to try to get a huge agency or whatever size company going. And it's like, oh, look how many people we got. And it was sort of like a way to brag without being as pompous as saying we've made this much money. And I think it feels to me anyway, like that's changing. Like having a big head count is not as cool anymore.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think there's the trend went the other way in COVID. People were showing off how they had no employees, and actually I had a couple of those people try to sell their businesses and no one would buy them. So, you know, went the other way. But I think the hybrid, you know, model is ultimately the flex is the future. Yeah, there's probably a lot I can say on that subject, but I certainly think, you know, right now, if I was an agency, I would be pausing recruitment and asking myself, what technology can I bring into my business that can make my team be more efficient, free up more time, so that we could then take those roles and merge them into the existing team. So how can you use technology to create more capacity, also to increase billings, value delivered to clients? And I in the last year, in my own consulting practice, and a lot of agencies are very much like me. I mean, I may be doing consulting and M&A, but ultimately, you know, the model's the same. You know, it's a professional services business. I've not recruited 2 people, and I've put in about 27 AI tools into my company, and those tools are all marginal gain. There's like, you know, just one tool that records the meetings and puts all the notes in HubSpot automatically with no manual intervention. Uploading documents and getting from our own LLM, getting Tabitha to analyze what's wrong, what's right. Would normally have spent a day. We can get it done in 30 minutes. So how can you increase, you know, your revenue? How can you increase your revenue by keeping your team the same? And that would be, for me, the best bit of advice I would give anyone right now because there's no question that there's going to be a massive, I mean, you've already seen the big agencies consolidate. All the big agencies have merged all their brands together. You saw WPP have just announced that last week that all the team have to return for a 4-day week now. Mm-hmm. They're going to be losing more and more people. That's helping them out because it's making them leaner, and they can then invest more money in technology.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that makes sense.
Have you had people before talk to you about the wage cost to GP metric and how there's a budget you kind of stick to. Like as a rule in agencies, it was the total wages should traditionally have never been more than 55% of your net revenue number. And some agencies have more people and make less money, and some people have less money and make their team work really hard. But I think that number is going to definitely fall in the next few years. And I think that's if the people listening who understand what I'm saying when I talk about that metric, I would be setting targets to reduce that maybe by 5% a year for the next 3 or 4 years.
Yes, that makes sense.
You're going to need the money for tech, basically.
Right. That makes sense. And I think one thing that's tough is just developing that muscle for how to implement that technology and so on.
I mean, it's lucky with me in a way, because I guess because I was always a technologist, as CEO, and I've got a few agency founders who are more tech based, that these guys can kind of do it and lead from it. If you're less so like that, the agencies I'm working with, I've told them to recruit someone who could be head of AI. Now, here's the thing. We talked about digital natives for years. Now we're talking about AI natives in the team. But there's going to be people for us to recruit, because you saw Mark Zuckerberg last week saying with Joe Rogan, he's going to basically, by the end of this year, they don't see Meta having any mid-weight developers in their business anymore. And he said all tech businesses will follow suit. So that means there's a lot of mid-weight tech developers that are going to come on the market, and those guys are going to be great for agencies who don't typically have a role like head of AI, if not in a marketing services agency anyway, maybe the more technical services ones. So I think there's going to be some real cycling of individuals and team and new roles coming in.
That makes a lot of sense. So Spencer, kind of getting towards the end of our time, what else haven't I asked you? What else do you think would be valuable for agency owners to know right now?
What else? We've covered it all, haven't we? I think that's it, really. I mean, look, I'm on my second business now, and I know you've had other people before that have done this twice. I think find someone that's trodden the path before you, specifically. That's my advice to agency owners always, and find someone like that who can be that, mentor or whatever, whether it's a non-exec, just to keep you focused. Because for me, like if I missed a month in sales, I'd miss a quarter. I miss a year. You miss the numbers. And so having someone to be accountable to, as an owner, you don't have a boss, right? You set a business up because you don't want a boss, but having someone to hold you to account makes a big difference, to make sure that you're hitting numbers. And some agencies, they take 20 years to get to $1 million or $2 million. And some do it in 12 months, and I think it's just really help yourself by shortening your journey rather than, because the risk of it going out of business down the line is very high. So that would be my last sort of,
That's great advice. And with that, where can people go to follow what you're up to?
Find me on LinkedIn, Spencer Gallagher. I'm also on Substack, Spencer Gallagher 1111. I've just started to blog and talk about the journey to AI for agencies. So just launched that. That's about that's it. I mean, that will do for the moment.
Yeah, I look forward to checking out the Substack. I wish that I'm looking forward to seeing more business stuff there in addition to just spicy takes on everything. So that's great.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned earlier on about what would the non-salesy would do. I think get on Substack and start using that skill of often writing, and because I'm terrible at writing. So
yeah, it helps, and there's definitely an early mover thing going on there. So Spencer, this is so much fun. Let's do it again, man.
Hey, no worries. It's great. And thank you for the opportunity, Dan.